Hello, everybody. Welcome back. um, thank you so much for organizing this workshop and also for inviting me to this. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to present the results of one of the most important ceramic production centers in ancient Egypt, which is located in the Aswan region of Upper Egypt and was specialized in the production of ceramic objects made of so-called pink clay. First, I want to give a small introduction to Syene, which we already heard from Mariola, but I think it's to keep it in mind. Modern Aswan, is this or not that one? Okay. Modern Aswan is synonymous with the ancient cities of Syene and Elephantine, which evolved into a political and economic center of the first Nile cataract already in the Ptolemaic period. Geographically, Syene represents the southernmost town in the Ptolemaic Empire and subsequently in the Roman Empire. This prominent position, along with the nearby island of Elephantine, was of particular significance with respect to, for example, the exchange of goods with Nubia to the south and the trade with the well-known rose granite extracted from local quarries since pharaonic times. The granite was distributed to northwards through the river ports of both Syene and Elephantine. Syene flourished, particularly due to trade, and reached an economic upturn in Hellenistic times, which is recognizable by the expansion of the inhabited city area. Elephantine was famous in pharaonic times, primarily because of its religious cult sites around the annual Nile flood. In the 5th century CE, the temple areas were successively released for secular development, and the island remained inhabited, despite to the conquest of Upper Egypt by the Arabs in 642 CE, continuously until the early Islamic period. In 2011, the Austrian Science Fund project Housing in Antiquity in Syene, Elephantine, Upper Egypt, directed by Sabine Ladstätter at the Austrian Archaeological Institute of the Austrian Academy of Sciences, in cooperation with the Swiss Institute of Architectural and Archaeological Research on Ancient Egypt, Cairo, started. The main goal of this 3-year project was a social-cultural interpretation of Syene and Elephantine from the late Ptolemaic period until late antique times, based on the material remains from different residential buildings. The pottery finds from Syene came from the excavation in areas 2 and 30C. In both areas, residential buildings were uncovered, which were used continuously from the Ptolemaic period to at least the Middle Roman imperial period. These are several residential buildings with adjoining courtyards for household activities along narrow alleys, which has been rebuilt several times in the course of time. The pottery from Elephantine comes from residential complex, so-called tower houses, which were built in the former temple area of Khnum in the 5th century CE and were in use until the end of the 7th century CE. In 2009, the recording of the pottery finds was initiated, and as you can see on the slide, some of the excavated layers consisted exclusively of ceramic, which meant that huge amounts of materials were gathered. The recording was carried out in several campaigns in Aswan and was limited on site to find statistics in which all fragments were counted and statistically recorded. Furthermore, the ceramics has been graphically and photographically documented and diagnostic pieces described in an Access database with all the relevant information such as measurements, fabrics, and decoration. A total of nearly 200,000 fragments recorded statistically. 5% of these were included in the database as diagnostic fragments. As such are considered rim and base fragments, as well as fragments with decoration and also body shirts of imported pottery. These diagnostic fragments were assigned to the wear groups. In this regard, the material from Syene and Elephantine can be differentiated into tableware, courseware, cookingware, transport amphora, and lamps. For decades, the Vienna system has been used for the classification of local and Egyptian ceramics. However, this system was developed for the description of pharaonic ceramics, especially from the Delta, and is therefore difficult to use to the Ptolemaic, Roman, and late antique ceramic fabrics in Upper Egypt. For this reason, we deliberately refrain from using the Vienna system when processing the pottery from Syene and Elephantine, and instead developed a guidance system based on a new criteria. Sorry. By integrating petrographic analysis in the study, for the first time, it was possible to determine the fabrics from both sides more precisely. The main focus of the analysis were placed on the local clay pastes. Due to the exploitation of native clay deposits, the region of Syene developed into a significant ceramic production center at the beginning of the 2nd century BCE. According to the complete statistic analysis, 10% of the vessels were made of the local clay pastes in Hellenistic and Roman times, while 75% of the overall late antique ceramic materials is represented in Aswan Pink Clay. This clay paste was used for the production of different kinds of wares and vessel forms, with tableware and amphora dominated by far. Pink clay is the term used in literature for a clay tentatively connected to kaolinitic sediments. These Aswan pink clay sediments are said to derive from the decomposition of pinkish feldspar minerals found in the local rose granite, available abundantly in the entire broader area. Petrographic analysis performed on a representative number of ceramic fragments that macroscopically had been identified as Aswan pink clay allowed a differentiation of 4 clay pastes based on the character of non-plastic inclusions embedded in the clay matrices. The petrofabric Aswan Pink Clay 1 can be designed as the typical, most common Aswan Pink Clay already described by Roberta Tomba and David Williams, who first examined a sherd of Aswan Pink Clay pottery in thin section. Petrofabric Aswan Pink Clay 4 gives the best evidence for a relatively pure and fine-grained kaolinitic sediment. 2 other variants of Aswan Pink Clay deviate slightly. Petrofabric 2 has an increased content of dark reddish to orange shale, already visible with the naked eye, and Pink Clay 3 is defined by an increased amount of opaque isotropic particles so far. So far in vessels in Aswan Pink Clay 4 only occur in the Ptolemaic period and the Roman imperial period, while Aswan Pink Clay 3 is only used in late antique period. A refiring experiment. Okay, thank you. A refiring experiment not only visualized that the clay gained the characteristic pinkish color at 850 degrees, which led to the name pink clay, but also illustrate the different color shades Aswan pink clay might exhibit. Although no complete pottery workshop structures were discovered in Syene to date, neither in the vicinity of the town nor on Elephantine Island, ceramic wastes such as unfired or misfired pottery indicate the existence of potteries in the area. Remains of kilns as well as pottery waste were found between the modern Aga Khan mausoleum and the monastery of St. Simeon in the 1980s. As a result, a possible production center has been assumed along the west bank of the Nile. 2 important remarks need to be made. First, the geology of Aswan and the area further north is relatively homogeneous, meaning that potentially clays with similar properties could have been provided from within an extensive area. And second, the availability of kaolinitic clay sediments in the Nile Valley, spanning from Aswan to Nagelhaga, 30 kilometers upstream, might complicate to pinpoint possible areas of clay supplies for Aswan ceramic workshops, not least because of the existence of yet another ceramic production center in Nagelhaga at the same time. Based on ceramic studies performed in Nagelhaga, we know that significant amounts of pottery macroscopically resembling Aswan Pink Clay have been recovered on site. Yet it remains unknown if the vessels were produced on the local kaolinitic sediment deposited around Nagelhaga or if they represent imports from upstream, which means Aswan. This means that the attribution of pinkish kaolinitic clays exclusively to Aswan might be challenged. However, as long as no comparative geological and petrographic data from clays and ceramics from Nagelhaga is available, this issue remains ambiguous. It might well be that in the future, the domination of Egypt's pinkish clays, known as Aswan Pink Clay, needs to be reconsidered. To get a more precise idea about the local ceramic production of Aswan, and especially the possible extraction areas of the 4 different clay pastes, a 1-week geological field survey was conducted in February 2013. The survey covered an area of around 480 square kilometers between Wadi Abu Zubeira in the north and the new Aswan Dam in the south, whereby the sites of interest were investigated by photographing the geological formations and mapping the spots of interest to GPS points. In November 2014, the survey was completed by taking geological samples from the relevant sites. These geological samples comprised clays, desert sand, and rock specimens that best reflect the geology of the respective sites surveyed. The main research question concerned the geological homogeneity or heterogeneity of the Aswan region specifically. Can clays of similar composition be found at different locations within that region, or are distinctive clay composition associated with particular sites? And based on this observation, do the clay pastes utilized in ancient pottery production match or at least resemble the native clay deposits? And finally, is the evidence obtained from the geological field survey strong enough to prove with hard scientific data the exclusive production of pink clay pottery in the Aswan region, or might similar ceramics have been made also further downstream, for instance, around Nagelhaga? The extensive area southeast of today's Aswan was categorized as particularly interesting, as granites and kaolinite are most common here. In the north, meter-thick clay deposits are widespread throughout the area, most of which are still in modern use. The West Bank also appeared to be very promising due to the kaolinitic clay sediments, which are associated with sandstones in various places. However, the localization of a large manufactory precisely in the area between Kubad el Hawa and the Aga Khan Mausoleum, where ceramic wastes were identified in the 1980s, may need to be reconsidered. The clay bands in this area are relatively thin, which makes the theory of large-scale mining of clay raw materials also which makes the theory of large-scale mining of clay raw materials, as would be expected for mass production, implausible. In November 2014, the survey was completed by taking 30 geological samples from the previously selected location. The samples were processed and fired at the IFAO in Cairo in the raw state, but also after firing, a wide variety of color nuances were revealed. The best match between the clay resources and the ceramic material comes from Wadi Zaman, directly opposite the island of Elephantine on the west bank. The clay matrix is kaolinitic and the spectrum of inclusions is comparable. This clay could have been used as base material for the production of ancient vessels. It can be assumed that there is a certain natural variability of this clay on the west bank or in the wider surroundings of Aswan, which could lead to the diversity of the 4 variants of Aswan Pink Clay. But let us now return to the ceramic finds and take a look at the development of locally produced pottery in Syene. With the conquest of Egypt by Alexander the Great in 332 BCE, the Greek influence began to spread to Upper Egypt, which can also be recognized in the repertoire of forms from Syene. It is therefore not surprising that the local pottery spectrum includes forms that were among the most popular in the Eastern Mediterranean at that time. The comprehensive analysis of the ceramic finds has also shown that in the course of the 1st century BCE, influences from the west or the Levant came to Upper Egypt, which can be traced back to the increased contact of the Romans, who took over the rule in Egypt from 30 BCE onwards. Greek influence can be seen particularly well in the locally produced tableware, as completely new forms suddenly appear from the 3rd century BCE. The adoption of new vessel shapes can probably point to an adoption of Greek eating and drinking customs. Drinking from hemispherical vessels or eating from larger flat forms are close to Eastern Mediterranean traditions. For example, Echinus bowl, like bowl type 1, and bowls with everted rim, bowl type 11, were common drinking utensils and plates with a thickened lip, and fish plates, plate type 5.1, were the favorite eating utensils. With the appearance of crater-like bowls, the consumption of wine, which was an important part of Greek table culture, is likely to have become increasingly important to Upper Egypt. From the middle of the 2nd century BCE, forms can be found in local tableware that are clearly imitations of the Eastern Sigillata A, such as plate type 10, which was produced in the Syrian Cilician region and became the dominant tableware in the Levant and Asia Minor in the 1st century BCE. In the course of the 1st century BCE, an increasing number of vessels, but also decorations appear that can clearly be traced back to an Italian influence. Cylindric beakers, but also the Barbudine decoration, were influenced by Italian thin-walled wares and became more widespread in the Eastern Mediterranean from the early 1st century CE at latest. In addition to the tableware, the local cookingware also reflects changing influences. From the 3rd century BCE, for example, bulbous cooking pot shapes with a round base and a flat casserole shapes were produced locally. Shapes that can be traced back to models from Greece. From the late 2nd century BCE, cooking plates, such as plate type 14.1, which are based on italic forms, expanded the repertoire of cookingware. However, as this cooking plate form was copied throughout the Eastern Mediterranean from the 2nd century BCE, it is not possible to say with certainty whether this form came to Upper Egypt from Italy or the Eastern Mediterranean region. These new forms of cooking indicate the adoption for foreign cooking habits. Casseroles and cooking plates were particularly good for preparing dry stews, which were mainly favored on hotter regions. These vessels were also easier to handle as they could be placed on portable ovens or braziers. The appearance of pans in the Roman imperial period brought a further change in the cooking process, and some of the food was now cooked over a fire. In late antiquity, the tableware produced locally was mainly influenced by vessels forms of the African red slipware from North Africa and the late Roman seaware from Asia Minor. In contrast to the bowls, which not only exhibit the greatest variety of forms, but also increasingly show characteristics of local Egyptian forms, the plates have the highest numbers of imitation of Mediterranean forms within the spectrum of finds. Looking at the range of forms in late antique pottery from Elephantine, we can see that the African red slipware forms were imitated throughout the centuries. The local imitation of the late Roman sea, on the other hand, are mainly found in the 5th century CE. In general, it can be observed that the local imitations have a longer or delayed lifespan than the originals. Unlike the almost exclusively locally made tableware, the situation is different for late antiquity cooking vessels. There is more imported cooking ware than tableware. Although this is local Egyptian pottery, probably from the Alexandria area. A comparison with the forms of cooking pots in the Mediterranean region shows that similar cooking vessels were also in the use at the same time in Italy, Greece, Jordan, Asia Minor, and Syria. The local imitation of Mediterranean tableware and cookingware also point to, let's say, Roman cooking and table customs in late antiquity, but these are mixed with strong local food traditions represented by the numerous Egyptian bowl shapes. Despite these innovations, traditional elements such as the polychrome painting on vessels did not disappear and were preserved in the ceramic production of Syene and Elephantine. Since the pharaonic times, painted decoration can be found on different kinds of vessel types. Especially tableware was decorated with geometric and vegetable motifs, which were very popular motifs in the late Ptolemaic period. This type of decoration almost completely disappeared in the Roman imperial period. It was not until late antiquity that painting as a decorative element became very popular again. 40% of the diagnostic pottery from Elephantine, predominantly tableware, was painted with geometric and/or figural motifs. The implementation of the decoration remained rather schematic. Rouletting and stamp decoration, already known from wares such as the African red slipware from the Mediterranean region, now appeared as a new decorative elements on the local tableware. Although numerous African red slip and late Roman sea vessel forms were imitated locally, only a few vessels were decorated with the stamp decoration typical of these wares. Most of the vessels were still painted. This shows that the local production of vessels was based on the Mediterranean forms. However, they were decorated in the Egyptian style. The chronological analysis of and comparison of the most popular decoration variants from the late antiquity also shows that painting was the predominant decorative variant until the middle of the 6th century CE. Thereafter, painting rapidly declined, while at the same time decoration with rouletting increased in popularity. Coming back to the archaeological evidence, it needs to be mentioned that despite the massive local ceramic production of Aswan, imports did reach the region. Especially in the early imperial period, Vessels of the common sigillator manufacturers arrived in the ancient city, as well as olive oil, wine, and garum, packed in amphora, were imported from all over the Roman Empire. In the course of the 1st century CE, imports, in particular the imported tableware, steadily decreased until they seemed to disappear almost completely at the beginning of the 2nd century CE. The reason can probably be found in the local ceramic production which experienced an enormous growth at that time. So far, only a few fragments of imported amphora found in excavations at Elephantine bear witness to exchange with North Africa, Greece, Asia Minor, Cyprus, and Palestine in late antiquity. In that regard, it should also be stressed that vessels of the common tableware, like the African red slipware, are nearly missing in the spectrum of finds at that time. In particular, no late Roman sea products have been found so far. All this shows the importance of the Aswan region as a pottery production center, at least for late antique times. In order to better understand the overall importance of the Aswan production area, it is also necessary to take a look at the export radius of Aswan Pink Clay, even if this is rather difficult to grasp. The export of vessels outside Egypt has so far been limited to just a few fragments, most which date from late antiquity. In the middle and late Ptolemaic periods, supra-regional trade in locally produced pottery from Aswan Pink Clay slowly began. From this time onwards, and especially from the Roman imperial period onwards, there is evidence of this export good throughout Egypt. So thanks for your attention.